For this segment, I want to talk about something that I don't normally talk about here, but I am extremely fond of, and that is basketball. Now, why am I talking about basketball? Well, it just so happens that um, George Karl, former coach of the Denver Nuggets, former coach of the Western Conference champion Seattle Supersonics with Gary Peyton and Shawn Kemp, and also former coach of the Kings, has made some pretty disparaging comments about a player currently in the league, and that player was Carmelo Anthony, who currently plays for the New York Knicks, which is actually my favorite team. Um, Now, these comments, unfortunately, were not limited to just his basketball game. He is an offensive player and always has been known as an offensive player. And I don't think that anyone disputes the fact that Carmelo is not necessarily a fan of passing the ball. And so if someone wanted to make that claim and say it's a little frustrating as a coach to have to deal with that, I mean, he has been known as being a liability on defense sometimes, then okay. I feel like those claims are perfectly legitimate. However, once you start assassinating someone's character, claiming, George Karl said in his book that it's a shame for someone to have all that money and no father figure to tell them how to use it. Saying things like Carmelo Anthony is a user, basically calling him egotistical and selfish and self-centered and assassinating his character. He has not only done this with Carmelo Anthony, but he has shown a pattern of this. He did the same thing with DeMarcus, aka Boogie Cousins of the Sacramento Kings, to such an extent that the Kings actually let him go shortly after hiring him because he simply could not get along with DeMarcus Cousins. And what it seems to me is that this is simply indicative of a pattern that we've seen over the years with older white male coaches who consider themselves authority figures when they're in coaching positions, which in a way you are, essentially asserting their will and their opinion and their image of what their young black athletes should be. And if they don't like it, they assassinate their character. This was something we saw with Rob Kelly. Oh, was it Rob Kelly? I believe it was either Kelly or Rex Ryan. I can't remember at the time. If you remember his name, if you remember who the coach of the Eagles at the time, drop below. But I'm pretty sure it was Kelly. Whenever he got rid of Deshawn Jackson, claiming that he was gang affiliated, essentially attempting to assassinate his character, and then the Eagles went on to back him up, trying to drop his value down, so that they could either retain him for cheap. Or he wouldn't get paid that much whenever he went to another team because he absolutely wanted out of Philadelphia. Like I said before, we saw this again when George Karl tried to assassinate the character of DeMarcus Cousins, asserting the same type of accusations. I mean, this is coaches dealing with coaches like Kelly. Coaches like George Karl. Recently, LeBron James said the same thing about Phil Jackson. Kind of represent what is wrong with the culture of sports when it comes to the classic idea of, the white male authority figure and how they deem the people that are under them and how they want you to present yourself. And Karl was out of line, completely and totally so. Simply because Carmelo did not fit your ideal, your ideal image of what a basketball player should be on your team, doesn't mean that he was a bad person. I'm sure Carmelo has his issues, but so does everyone else. Now, what's troubling to me is the fact that Carmelo, Andre Iguodala, J.R. Smith, DeMarcus Cousins, and others have all expressed how much they dislike George Karl because they essentially refer to him as a snake in the grass. And there's a reason for that. Whenever you can't bring home a championship and you start blaming your players every single time, how about you start questioning why players never wanted to come play with you? How about you figure out why the only player you could get that was of significant interest was Chauncey Billups whenever Carmelo was there. and yet you still managed to make it to the conference finals with Carmelo Anthony. Unfortunately, I believe you met the Spurs, so that's why you lost. But nobody wanted to play with you. People want to play with Melo. Like, that's why he ended up having Amari Stoudemire. Chauncey Billups followed him to the Knicks. He's had great players around him. They could have been better, but now he has great players around him. But your job as a coach is to facilitate and create an environment that is conducive to a cohesive unit where people feel like they're supported. And if you're going to have the nerve to complain about someone not having a father figure, and that's the way they act, that's why they act the way they do. One of the things that makes a good coach is when they can be a secondary father figure to the players on his or her team. That is what makes a good coach, when you can be that mentor. And you obviously failed at it. And what's sickening about this entire thing is that he did this in his book to make a profit. So whether these are his true feelings or not are up for debate, but nonetheless, you said this for profit, and you're assassinating the character of someone who's still an active player in the league. And you never say anything about Gary Payton. You never say anything about Shawn Kemp. And those of us who know Shawn Kemp, or specifically Gary Payton, know that he was kind of an asshole. That's what he did. Almost all defenders are assholes. So there's nothing really new about that, but he didn't say anything negative about them. George Karl, you have 0 rings. You have 1 conference championship. Everywhere you go, you get fired. With that Nuggets team, with the best scorer in the league at the time, Carmelo Anthony, having Chauncey Billups, having Kenyan Martin, at one point having Nene, you should have been able to attract players to the Denver Nuggets. You should have been able to make them a more offensive or defensively minded team. And if Carmelo Anthony decided at that point in his very young career that he wasn't going to play defense the way you wanted to, you should have instilled the defender inside of him. That is why Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan got good. Their whole life had not been surrounded. Their whole life was in defense, but Phil Jackson instilled defense in them. The same thing is happening with the Knicks right now. They weren't a defensive team. Now they're becoming a defensive team. The Spurs, they don't have a lot of great defenders, but they play great team defense. Same thing with the Warriors. They score a lot of points, not because they have great shooters, but because they play great defense. So these are things that good coaches account for and deal with. You, however, did not. And now you're trying to blame the players, individual players, for their attitude problems. Welcome to a league. Welcome to the association. Welcome to anybody who's a millionaire. You are hired to fix those problems, to make the unit cohesive, not insult the players that you coach for profit. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.